Dear students, welcome back to my class. Today I'm going to talk on a new chapter according to our course. Today we will be talking about footprints without feet. When you talk about the title of this particular chapter, Footprints Without Feet, what do you imagine? There are footprints. The footprint is printing one after another, but you don't see the feet. So in that case, what do you imagine? Something magical? Something wonderful? Of course, yes. So let us talk about this particular story. And if you talk about this story, you must talk about the writer. Okay? So this is a story written by H.G. Wells, and he is a very famous science fiction writer. So, of course, we are not going to talk about him, but before we go on to this particular story, we must know from where this particular story came. Okay? So, this story is not originally written, but then H.G. Wells has written a book called The Invisible Man. It's a big novel, a science fiction novel. So if you want to find more about the story, you can go to that book and read it. You might find online also, and you may buy it and read the book. Okay? So the story that we have now is only a portion of that particular novel written by H.G. Wells, The Invisible Man. Okay? The Footprints Without Feet is a small portion, or you can say abridged form of the story. We come across the major portion of the story in this particular story, Footprints Without Feet. Okay? So now let's talk how it begins. Here, the story begins with a situation here. We have a scientist who is hardworking and always trying to experiment with his knowledge of science. We know knowledge is power. So he was hardworking and he experimented to make the human body invisible. He worked hard day in and day out, and then successfully one day, I should not say successfully, but accidentally, he came across a particular drug, and you have to think about him as a little different fellow. A fellow who always disregards the law. So his name is Griffin. He experimented and accidentally one day came across a drug, and what happened to him is that he became invisible. His body turned invisible, but his body remained as solid as a sheet of glass and transparent. Okay? And you could see him only when he wears clothes. That's how it is. So one day, after he had come across this experiment and made himself invisible accidentally, he could not really discover the drug that could make him come back into a normal human being again, so that he can be visible again. So what happened is, he was angry with his landlord, because his landlord always complained about his character, about his behavior, and wanted to eject him out of his house. So Griffin was angry for that, and one day, after becoming invisible, Griffin set fire to the house of the landlord, and then he escaped. Okay? And it was a cold, London. You imagine during cold season, midwinter, how freezing, how cold it would be. So one day, two boys were walking on the street, and just in front of them, as they were walking, they could see footprints printed in front of them, in their presence. But then they could not see the person who was walking before them. They were surprised, and so they followed him. The bare feet actually happened to stumble somewhere on a muddy place So as he was walking on the streets, the wet feet was printing the footprints. Okay, this is how the story starts here. Let's read. It says like this. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? So this was their surprise. The footprints were printed in front of them, before their eyes, and then it was really surprising for them, thinking about what a man is actually doing in cold place like London, and that is also barefooted. And what is he doing on the staircase of a house? So that was the concern, okay? And they were surprised. As they gazed, they were looking at the footprints, as the footprints were printing one after another as he walked on the street. Okay, and they followed the footprints. And it says like this: as they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. As they were looking at the footprints, what they could see, surprisingly, what that made them surprised the most was a fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. If this happens to you, how would you react to that? I don't know. But for me, I would be a little bit surprised, taken aback, or you should say the situation become a little bit scary. Alright? So you think about yourself, you imagine what you would react, how you would react in that particular situation. Okay, that's what I would not comment on behalf of you, but you think about it. So further, footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter, and at last disappeared altogether. So this is what happened. The two boys followed it until the footprints could not be seen anymore. Because as long as your feet is wet, you can see the new imprints of the foot printed on the street. But then as he was walking, his feet got dried slowly. And as he walked, slowly the footprints seemed to disappear. Okay? So that's what it happened. They could not see the footprints anymore. And they lost sight of the invisible man. Okay? The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. So how it happened like that? And why the footprints, barefooted footprints were printed? That result can be found here. I already told you how it started. It started with Griffin, who was experimenting how he could transform the human body and make it invisible. Okay, it started with this. So the explanation of the mystery is really simple, and it's like this. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. So the situation here is the bewildered boys, the confused boys, that means. Okay, the two boys were following the footprints of a scientist who had just discovered how he could make a human body invisible. Okay, but then there's a problem in his discovery. He could not find out the medicine or the drug or the solution through which he can bring his body back to visible human nature. Okay, that is the twist in his discovery. Now Griffin the scientist had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. This is where core of the situation in the story lies. Okay, so Griffin, I told you that he was hardworking and he experimented day in and day out. Okay, and came out with this particular result of making human body transparent, but failed to bring his body back to a normal human being, just like you can see me or I can see you, like that. Okay, so that's the sorry part of his story. Alright? Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. Look at this. Although he became invisible, if you touch him accidentally, you will feel his body as solid as we are, or as solid as a sheet of glass. Here's a glass here, okay, and as transparent as the sheet of glass. My hand is on the other side of the glass. You can see this is the glass, and out there is my hand. So it is like that. All right. And though he was a brilliant scientist, as I have already told you, that he was not a law-abiding person. Okay, so he was a rather lawless person, and because of this attitude, his character, his landlord disliked him. I have already told you, and his landlord wanted to eject him out of his house. So out of anger, Griffin set fire to his house and ran away. He escaped. And how can he escape now? By removing his clothes, he can become invisible, no one can see him, and then thus he became a wanderer, a homeless wanderer, and that also during a very, very cold season. Okay, during a very, very cold season. So you just wonder about how it would be if you have to remain outside in the cold, out of doors, without clothes in midwinter, days or night. Days are okay, of course, but in England even days would be so cold you can't even imagine. We don't have this kind of climatic condition in our place here, but then you consider about England. Okay, he was in London. This incident happened in London. All right, so he was walking, he was without money, quite invisible, and so that's how he was walking here and there, and he stumbled upon some muddy place, and as he was walking, footprints were printed on the street. Okay, and that's how those two boys came across this mystery. Okay, the mystery of printing footprints without feet. Okay, so he could escape easily because he was invisible. He thrown off his clothes, but then it doesn't end here. His adventure started with the situation of his swallowing the newfound drugs and becoming invisible. But then he's going to come across different adventures in his life. And that adventures may be good or bad, but mostly you will find bad in his situation. Okay, so his adventures were by no means over. He had to go ahead with a lot of other happenings in his life. Let's see what happens. The real bad thing about him is that he had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes, barefoot. Okay, that's the real deal in the story. It was midwinter and the air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Remaining without clothes in such a cold winter, bitterly cold, it says, look at this adjective, bitterly cold. It's too cold. Okay, so instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Then he decided to slip inside a store, hidingly go inside a store because he is invisible, no one can see him. So he slipped through the door inside a big London store to find some warmth because it's cold outside and he needs clothes to protect him from cold. Okay, so we will find out more in the next episode of this class, what happens there inside the London store. Okay, and for now I think I'll close the video today, otherwise it will be too long for you, and so bye. Thank you for watching.